following is a presentation of the Retro Network.
Welcome to the Wide World of Toys podcast. I'm your host, Ken, and I'm glad you found your way back to the show. This is episode number 5, and I hope you enjoyed episode number 4, where I gave 4 of my favorite electronic games from the 70s. It was fun to go back to some of my very early years of childhood and reminisce about those simple yet iconic games that we all loved so much. That episode is available now under the Retro Resurgence podcast feed. Go give it a listen if you have not yet. But before we get into episode 5, let's go back and read some feedback that we got from last episode. Just one piece of feedback from episode 4, and this is coming from our loyal listener over there on the Retro Resurgence podcast, and this is from Gerospace. And he says, "Looking back, I feel pretty lucky because I had all of these. I got the digital derby for my birthday and spent so many hours playing that. This episode is a flood of awesome memories. Thank you." Yeah, Gerospace, we covered some pretty cool games from back in the 70s, and yeah, wow, you had all these games that I mentioned. Like you said, I mentioned the digital derby, Simon, Merlin, and electronic football, so yeah, it's pretty cool that you had all those games, and thank you very much for your feedback as always. Not only can you leave me feedback on my Instagram, Wide World of Toys _RRTRN, you can also leave feedback under the Wide World of Toys tab on the Retro Resurgence podcast website, which is www.theretroresurgence.com. All right, everybody. Now let's get into the main topic of the show, of episode 5. The 1980s gave us some of the most iconic toy lines of all time, but beyond the giants like Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Masters of the Universe, there was a whole world of strange and often overlooked toys that have faded into cult legend. In this episode, I'll dive into 5 underrated toy lines from the 80s that may have slipped under the radar, but still hold a special place in the hearts of collectors and retro toy fans. From bold concepts and wild character designs to toy lines that burned bright but faded fast, these forgotten gems tell a fascinating story about one of the most inventive eras in toy history. So dust off those memories, crack open that toy box in your mind, and join me as I uncover 5 hidden relics from the most radical decade in toy history. So this isn't going to be, per se, a top 5 episode, but this will be just 5 toy lines that I think were underrated from the 80s decade. So here we go. And that first toy line I'm going to talk about is Battle Beasts.
Battle Beast, wood, fire, fire burns wood. Battle Beast, fire, water, water puts out fire. Battle Beast, water, wood beats water. Battle Beast, battle for the fun of it.
Just activate their battle badges.
I got fire, I got water, water beats fire.
Battle Beast,
Wood, fire, fire beats wood.
Battle Beast can grow into an army.
Collect all 84.
Battle Beast.
Battle Beasts was one of the most memorable cult toy lines of the 80s. It was a line of small, collectible action figures introduced in the mid to late 1980s, originally created by Takara in Japan and distributed in North America by Hasbro. The figures were typically about 2 inches tall and featured anthropomorphic animal warriors wearing futuristic armor and carrying weapons. Each character had its own unique sculpt, weapon, and faction symbol. What made these figures stand out was their heat-sensitive rub symbol on the chest. When rubbed with the finger, the symbol revealed one of 3 elemental factions: fire, water, and wood. This helped create a simple battle mechanic similar to rock, paper, scissors. Fire beats wood, wood beats water, and water beats fire. This gimmick was a huge part of the fun for kids in the 80s. The line actually began in Japan in 1986 under the name Beast Formers, where it was tied into the Japanese Transformers: The Headmasters universe. In Japan, these characters were depicted as inhabitants of Planet Beast, making them essentially a spin-off of the Transformers brand. But when the line was brought to the United States by Hasbro in 1987, the Transformers connection was dropped and it was marketed as its own standalone toy line. Some of the more popular characters in the Battle Beast toy line included Pirate Lion, White Leo, Rocky Rhino, Gargantuan Gorilla, Night Owl, and Horny Toad. These characters would become favorites among collectors because each had a memorable sculpt and weapon. The original line had multiple series, eventually totaling 76 regular figures in the first waves. Hasbro also released vehicles, animal-themed chariots, bases and playsets, mail-away exclusives, collector posters, and bandoliers for carrying the figures, which is always a great idea. Later, a 4th wave evolved into the Laser Beasts line, which replaced the rub signs with chest orbs and introduced more sci-fi styled weapons. Although Battle Beasts never reached the same mainstream success as G.I. Joe or Transformers, they became beloved because they had highly collectible designs, bright paint applications, unique animal characters, they were easy to carry and pocket size, and they had the fun battle gimmick. Today, they are considered one of the great cult 80s toy lines, especially among vintage toy collectors. Original carded figures and rare variants can be quite valuable. The legacy of Battle Beast has since been attempted and had revivals over the years, including versions from Diamond Select Toys and a spiritual successor by Takara Tomy called Beast Saga. Even decades later, the line remains nostalgic for collectors who grew up in the 80s. And that's going to bring us to our second underrated toy line of the 80s, which is Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light toy line.
Know the magic control destiny, where spectral knights battle evil darkling lords.
Visionaries, knights of the magical light. Visionaries, with magical powers they fight. Visionaries.
It's coming, An amazing holographic world erupting in furious battle as the visionaries fight for the power of the magical light. Coming soon from the makers of Transformers.
One of the most creative and underrated lines of the decade. Released by Hasbro in 1987, Visionaries Knights of the Magical Light blended science fiction, fantasy, and hologram technology into a unique action figure line. Set on the fictional world of Prismos, the story centered on a future civilization where technology suddenly stopped working after a cosmic event, forcing society to return to magic. Two rival factions battle for control. The Spectral Knights, heroic rulers led by Leoric, and the Darkling Lords, villainous warlords led by Darkstorm. Each character was a futuristic knight with animal-themed magical powers granted by the wizard Merklin. Some of the things that made this toy line unforgettable was its use of lenticular holograms. There was a hologram image on each figure's chest armor, a second hologram in each magical staff. There were holographic details on the vehicles. This was a huge visual gimmick and one of the line's biggest selling points. Some history on this toy line. Hasbro launched the line during the peak of the cartoon toy boom of the mid to late 1980s, when properties like Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Mask dominated store shelves. Like many successful lines of the era, Visionaries was supported by a 13-episode animated series by Sunbow, a Star Comics miniseries from Marvel, and colorful packaging with character art and hologram callouts. The initial release of Visionaries included 12 core figures, 4 vehicles, and exclusive driver figures packed with the vehicles. The figures stood around 5 inches tall with articulation similar to G.I. Joe, but bulkier armor and fantasy weapons. Some of the main figures for the Spectral Knights were Leoric, Witterquick, Arzon, Cryotech, and then they had vehicle exclusives Ektar and Feral. On the other side, for the Darkling Lords, you had Darkstorm, Kravex, Lexor, Sindar, and their vehicle exclusives were called Recon and Mortdread. Each had a magical animal totem such as lion, eagle, bear, or bat-spider hybrid. Although this toy line had a great gimmick, despite its originality, the line lasted only 1 year, and there were several reasons for that. One being high production cost. The holograms were expensive to manufacture compared with standard action figures. 2. Heavy competition. 1987 toy aisles were crowded with major hits like Transformers, G.I. Joe, TMNT, which was just beginning, and Mask. And the third reason was the cartoon ended quickly. The animated series only ran 13 episodes, limiting long-term support and character development. A second wave was planned for 1988, but it was canceled before release. Today, Visionaries has become a cult favorite vintage line. Collectors especially look for intact holograms, complete staffs and helmets, carded figures with bright package art, and the rare vehicles. Loose figures are still fairly common, but complete examples with accessories can be much harder to find. The line is often remembered as one of Hasbro's most imaginative concepts of the 80s, a perfect mix of knights, lasers, magic, and holograms. Our third underrated toy line of the 80s is Brave Star.
The planet was doomed until he came. The toughest lawman in the Western Galaxy. Marshal Bravestar, the only man who could stop Tex Hex, the evilest space outlaw ever. The biggest laser battle in space is about to begin. Get ready. Marshal Bravestar, Tex Hex, the neutral laser, and you. Blow open the town and blast off the outlaws with weapons that shoot invisible electronic beams.
Awesome!
Bravestar, coming soon from Mattel, batteries not included, toys sold separately.
One of the great forgotten gems of the 80s toy aisle, blending the popularity of sci-fi and western themes into a uniquely memorable line. Bravestar was brought to us by Mattel in 1986, a year before the animated television series premiered in 1987. Produced in partnership with Filmation, the line was a bold attempt to capture the success of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe by combining space-age science fiction with classic Old West motifs. Set on the desert frontier world of New Texas, the line centered on Marshall Bravestar, a futuristic lawman with mystical powers including the eyes of the hawk, ears of the wolf, strength of the bear, and speed of the puma. He battled villains like Tex Hex, Thunderstick, and Outlaw Scuzz, alongside allies such as 3030, the transforming techno horse gunslinger. The toy line stood out because it was larger than most figures of the era, with most characters measuring close to 8 inches tall, making them bigger than G.I. Joe's 3 3/4 inch figures and even larger than Masters of the Universe. Mattel released a relatively compact but highly distinctive first wave. Each figure came with multiple accessories, removable hats or armor pieces, curium nuggets, which were the fictional precious mineral from the show, and spring-loaded or action feature gimmicks. One of the more memorable features was the Laser Fire Backpack, an infrared electronic accessory with sound effects that could interact with the Neutra Laser weapon system. This electronic play feature was very advanced for the time and helped set the line apart from competitors. This line, like all the other lines of the 80s, did have vehicles and playsets, and Mattel produced several vehicles and larger items, including 3030, sold as both character and mount, Stratacoach, Skullwalker, and Fort Curium. These gave the line a strong play pattern feel similar to Mask and He-Man. The Skullwalker, Tex Hex's spider-like vehicle, is remembered by collectors as one of the coolest villain vehicles of the era. But this toy line struggled as well. Despite strong design and ambitious marketing, Bravestar never reached the popularity of its Mattel sibling, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, with one of the major reasons just being as simple as timing. Mattel released the toys in 1986, but the TV series did not debut until 1987, which meant kids encountered the figures before they had any emotional connection to the characters. This hurt momentum badly. Even Filmation's Lou Scheimer later commented that releasing the toys first was a mistake. By the late 80s, shelves were already crowded with Transformers, G.I. Joe, TMNT, Thundercats, and Silverhawks, and eventually Bravestar became lost in a fiercely competitive market. Sales were soft, and the planned second wave, which reportedly included Judge, JB, Dingo Dan, Long Arm John, and the Starhawk vehicle, was canceled before release. Today, Bravestar is considered one of the most beloved cult toy lines of the 80s. Collectors especially look for boxed laser fire figures, Fort Curium playsets, the Skullwalker, and prototype unreleased figures. It's a combination of cowboys, robots, aliens, and space technology, gives it a unique identity that still feels unlike anything else from the decade. For many vintage toy fans, it remains one of the greatest what could have been lines of the era. Alright, so that's going to bring us to our fourth underrated toy line of the 80s, and this is sort of a personal favorite of mine out of the 5, and this is Jace and the Wheeled Warriors.
All vehicles in the Wheeled Warriors collection are sold separately. Some parts not for use with some toys. New from Mattel. Watch out! Beast Walker is coming. Can Trailblazer stop him? The ultimate battle coming soon.
This toy line was one of the more imaginative and sadly short-lived toy lines of the 80s. Released by Mattel in 1985, it combined futuristic combat vehicles, modular parts, and a science fantasy theme that stood out during the golden age of toy-driven cartoons. Mattel originally launched the line under the simpler name Wheeled Warriors. The concept centered around two opposing forces, the Lightning League, heroic white and silver vehicles, and the Monster Minds, evil green, organic-looking battle machines. This line's big gimmick was called Stack and Attack, modular design. Kids could mix and match wheels, chassis, weapons, and upper sections between vehicles to create custom machines. This was one of the line's strongest selling points and made it highly replayable. Popular vehicles included Armed Force, Drill Sergeant, Spike Trike, Quick Draw, Saw Boss, Gun Grinner, KO Cruiser, and Terror Tank. I think for one Christmas when I was a kid, I received, it was either Drill Sergeant or Saw Boss as a Christmas gift, and I really liked it. There were also larger motorized toys such as Trailblazer and Beastwalker, which added battery-powered movement. Unlike many 80s toy lines that focused on articulated action figures, Wheeled Warriors leaned heavily into vehicle first, with smaller driver figures and creature components. Like many successful 80s brands, this toy line was supported by an animated TV series, Jace and the Wheeled Warriors. The cartoon premiered in 1985 and ran for 65 episodes. It was created specifically to help sell the toys, much like Transformers, G.I. Joe, and He-Man. However, there was one major problem. The cartoon's storyline and characters were much richer than the toy line itself. The toys originally had a loose heroes versus plant monsters premise. The show added a much deeper story about Jace searching for his father Audric, the magical root, the villain Sawboss, and the Interstellar Lightning League. Ironically, the show became more memorable than the toys. And that's why, despite the excellent cartoon and memorable theme song, the toy line sold poorly. A major reason was the disconnect between the toy packaging and the show's characters. The early toys included fairly generic drivers and monster brains, rather than accurate character representations from the cartoon. This mismatch made it harder for kids to connect the toys with what they saw on TV. Mattel reportedly planned a second wave with more cartoon-accurate figures and vehicles, but the line was canceled before it reached stores. This makes Jace and the Wheeled Warriors one of the most famous one-and-done toy lines of the 80s. Today, the line has become a cult favorite among vintage toy collectors and 80s cartoon fans. The legacy lives on because of the unforgettable theme song, unique modular vehicle designs, strange sci-fi fantasy aesthetic, and a rarity of surviving boxed toys. For many collectors, it sits alongside forgotten but beloved lines like the aforementioned Visionaries, Sectors, and the toy line that's going to lead us into our final pick, Dino Riders. And yes, that's going to lead us into our final underrated toy line here for the episode. And I just mentioned it, and this is Dino Riders.
The new Dino Riders are here. Dino Riders. 10 new dinosaurs in the Dino Riders collection. Stegosaurus with motorized walking action and full battle gear. The gigantic new Brontosaurus, the fighting fortress. The new Dino Riders are all equipped with armor and action figures. Now the most fearsome creatures to walk the earth are the greatest force in the universe. 22 awesome dinosaurs in the Dino Riders collection. Dino Riders. Only from...
And this toy line was 1980s toy magic. The line included everything from T-Rex, Triceratops, and Brontosaurus to flying reptiles and later Ice Age mammals. Tyco developed the line during the peak of the 80s action figure boom, when franchises like G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe, and Transformers were dominating store shelves. The idea reportedly came from Tyco executives wanting to combine the enduring popularity of dinosaurs with science fiction action figures. The result was a line that stood out immediately from competitors. One of the line's major strengths was surprisingly accurate dinosaur sculpting for the time. Tyco even worked with paleontologist Robert T. Baker as a consultant, which gave the toys a more realistic look than many dinosaur toys of the era. Like many 80s toy lines, Dino Riders was supported by a syndicated animated series produced with Marvel Productions. The cartoon debuted in 1988 and ran for only 14 episodes. Its main purpose was to promote the toys, but it developed a surprisingly rich mythology involving time travel, psychic powers, and futuristic warfare on prehistoric Earth. For many fans, the cartoon is what cemented the line's legacy. Unlike some of the other toy lines that we've talked about tonight, this line had several releases. Series 1, coming in 1988, which featured some most famous sets, as I said, T-Rex and Triceratops. These often had moving features and elaborate weapon platforms. Series 2, from 1989, expanded the line with larger creatures like the massive Brontosaurus, one of the most famous toys in the line. In Series 3, from 1990, was called the Ice Age series, which later releases introduced rarer dinosaurs and prehistoric mammals like mammoth and saber-toothed cats. These later waves are especially sought after by collectors today. Despite its popularity, Dino Riders was short-lived. By the early 1990s, the toy market had become incredibly competitive, and many 80s lines were disappearing. The combination of large, expensive dinosaur molds and shifting toy trends likely contributed to the line's end after only a few years. Today, Dino Riders is considered a cult classic of 80s toy history. Original boxed figures, especially large dinosaurs like T-Rex and Brontosaurus, can be highly valuable in the collector market. The mix of dinosaurs, sci-fi weapons, memorable villains, and cartoon tie-in storytelling has made it one of the most fondly remembered toy lines of the decade. Well, there you have it, everyone. 5 underrated toy lines from the 80s that just didn't quite make it to the mainstream back in the day. But these toy lines still remain a big part of the 80s toy and cartoon lore, and definitely have their fans and die-hard followers. If I had to give a quick ranking of these 5 lines that I talked about tonight, I would start at number 5 being Brave Star, number 4, Visionaries, number 3, Jace and the Wheeled Warriors, number 2, Battle Beasts, and I would pick Dino Riders as my number 1. This episode was fun to research and put together, as I had not known about a few of these lines as I was a bit older when they were introduced. But it's always cool to go back and learn about some of the things that you missed out on. That's going to do it, everyone, for episode 5. Thanks for listening, as always. I will see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to the Wide World of Toys podcast. I hope you enjoyed diving into the world of toy collecting with me today. You can find this show under the Retro Resurgence podcast feed on all your main podcast platforms. You can also find the Retro Resurgence podcast on our website, www.theretroresurgence.com, or at our flagship website, The Retro Network, www.theretronetwork.com as well. You can also follow the show at my Instagram account at wideworldoftoys_RRTRN or at The Retro Resurgence on Instagram, where you can share your favorite childhood toys or latest finds. I'll read any feedback I get on the show. Until next time, keep hunting, keep displaying, and keep those childhood memories alive, one collectible at a time. This is Ken signing off, and remember, growing up is optional, but collecting, that's forever. We'll see you soon.
This has been a presentation of the Retro Network.